JSN has officially separated himself from the other two wide receivers here, where he is now averaging 23.2 fantasy points per game after he just dropped 37 against the Tennessee Titans. And the last time JSN was not a top 10 wide receiver on the week was back in week 4. That's like, what, over 2 months ago. I mean, you just know you get the ceiling, you get the floor. With Puka Nacua, like, we haven't seen him hit 30 fantasy points since week 4. Now, still, I mean, he gives you such a high floor every single week that he's averaging 21 points per game. Ja'Marr Chase, if you remove this past week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, is right up there, 21, 22 points per game. Against the Steelers in week 11, it was tough. And then week 12, you get suspended. You get Joe Burrow back this week, more likely than not. And you have T. Higgins injured at the same time. Now, moving over to our next tier, we are going to have Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, if I'm going to be honest with you, St. Brown may deserve his own little mini tier where maybe St. Brown's just by himself, but we're going to leave him here for now for this video. Over the past 4 games, Amon-Ra St. Brown's actually come through and he's had 46 total targets. He has his season high 149 receiving yards in this game. Now, tough matchup against the Green Bay Packers this next week. Tough matchup against the Los Angeles Rams in week 15. But you do get some good ones against the Dallas Cowboys and the Pittsburgh Steelers sprinkled in. Then we officially have to do it. We have to put George Pickens as the wide receiver 1 over CeeDee Lamb in Dallas. Back-to-back games with both these players out there, both these players healthy, where Pickens goes for 9 receptions, over 140 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. My biggest regret this season in drafts is not targeting George Pickens. Everybody with half a brain cell knew that George Pickens was the best pick at the end of the 4th round, the beginning of the 5th round. For whatever reason, I was stubborn. I wasn't willing to go in that direction, and I am now paying the price because of it. Hell, I lost this past week because George Pickens just comes through and puts the nail in the freaking coffin on me. CeeDee Lamb keeps drawing targets. He had 11 targets this past week. The issue is he can't hold on to the ball. He's only averaging about 15 points per game so far this season. But I am going to give CeeDee Lamb the benefit of the doubt, know that the target volume is consistent, and we have seen him be the elite wide receiver in the past. Now, moving over to Davante Adams. Davante Adams has been a super solid option. This is another wide receiver that, damn, I just wish I drafted more of him. I mean, so far this season, he has scored 12 touchdowns. 12 touchdowns, and he's played 11 games. He's been absolutely incredible. Now, of course, the yardage totals are never there. He's had 90 or more receiving yards once this year. The target volume's not exactly there either. But this is just the one wide receiver that you can confidently say, when they get to the red zone, they are going to be looking at Davante Adams. Now, Nico Collins is the wide receiver 1 for my own fantasy team. Yeah, it was frustrating with him face planting against the Buffalo Bills in week 12. But I do think that's a short week, just tough matchup against Buffalo. If we had looked at the previous 4 games for Nico Collins, he had 10, 15, 11, and 10 targets. And one of those games he left early with the concussion as well. So target volume consistent, large sample of dominance over the past 2 years of his NFL career. Chris Olave is in an offense that obviously is not great, but it has a pretty good schedule going into the future. You get to play Miami, Carolina, the Jets, the Tennessee Titans. And obviously, Olave is at the very top of the NFL with his targets, averaging 9.8 targets per game so far this season. The only wide receiver that I can see averaging more targets per game is actually Ja'Marr Chase. Now, Egbuka is a wide receiver falling down our rankings for a multitude of reasons, but the number one reason being is you possibly have no Baker Mayfield. Now, of course, if Baker Mayfield is back in this offense, then all of a sudden we will update these ranks and Egbuka will move up. But you have Godwin back in and now no Baker. So all of a sudden you have a little more target competition, not much, but a little bit more, and a much worse offense. Now, Michael Pittman Jr., it just continues to be a strong option. While he only had 27 receiving yards, he does come through with a receiving touchdown, and he had 8 targets, which is the main thing that I want to look at. Now, while yes, the Indianapolis Colts have to play against the Houston Texans twice through the rest of this season, the benefit that you get here is one of these weeks for the Colts, that Texans matchup is in week 18, so you're not going to be dealing with it for fantasy purposes. Drake London is a wide receiver that's difficult to rank right now because we don't know his availability in the short term. What we have been told is that he is trending towards playing in week 13, but obviously we have no way of confirming that right now. What I can confirm, though, is it doesn't look like Kirk Cousins is very good at this point, and he is going to have to deal with Kirk Cousins through the rest of this year. J.J. McCarthy is maybe worse than Kirk Cousins, though. Justin Jefferson, it is so sad to say this. Justin Jefferson is averaging 13.8 fantasy points per game. Now, he's averaging 9 targets per game, which is obviously a very exciting mark on that front. But 13.8 fantasy points per game for a receiver you possibly want to make an argument, or I possibly would want to make an argument, is the most talented guy in the league. It's just J.J. McCarthy's horrendous. J.J. McCarthy looks like Zach Wilson right now. I don't know if he's going to turn the corner, but what we've historically seen is these quarterbacks that are this bad their rookie season, whether it's Trevor Lawrence, whether it's Bryce Young, they don't turn the corner. It just continues to be god awful. Our last wide receiver in this tier is going to be dealing with one of those god awful quarterbacks in Bryce Young. We have yet to see Tedero McMillan play this week. I will say he's trending in the right direction. Looks like an incredible talent. And don't get me wrong, Bryce Young at this point of his NFL career is much better than rookie J.J. McCarthy. We will update the ranking with Tedero McMillan after the Niners game in tonight's live stream. For his expectations in tonight's game, Underdog Fantasy has him higher lower 65.5 receiving yards, higher lower 11.55 fantasy points. And obviously, if you wanted to go take advantage of any of those picks on Underdog Fantasy, you can find that link in the description as well as the comment section. Code FLOCK will get you $100 added to your account after you play your first 5. Free questions that you can use to ask me in the live streams that we're streaming every single night till Christmas. And you'll get a gimme Christian McCaffrey pick, higher lower half a total yard for tonight's game. Now, moving over to C tier, we are going to have Jalen Waddle. This is the wide receiver 2 for my own fantasy team. And honestly, I think Tua is a much better quarterback at this point of his career than what you have with a quarterback like J.J. McCarthy. Waddle's giving you a consistent target floor. He has had at least 6 targets in every game this season, but 2, and he's had at least 4 targets in every single game. The ceiling is just extremely questionable, though, because the offense isn't great. Now, Devonta Smith will be our next wide receiver. I really hope we get some big Smith blow-up weeks going into the future because, again, I drafted this dude in a bunch of underdog drafts. But ultimately, he is still the wide receiver 1 in Philadelphia, at least in my mind. I mean, he's sitting here averaging 13.5 fantasy points per game in comparison to A.J. Brown, with 12.7. And while, yes, A.J. Brown scored the touchdown this past week, and A.J. Brown was close to scoring 2 touchdowns, we've just seen the largest sample of Devonta Smith, and Smith had more targets than him this week. T. Higgins, difficult to rank right now. It looked like a pretty bad concussion. Obviously, with the concussion, we're not worried about him missing the rest of the season by any stretch of the imagination. But I believe they are on the short week here with the Thursday night game. I think they play on Thanksgiving. So if that's the case, I'd be very surprised if he plays in week 13. But you should get Joe Burrow back for the fantasy playoffs, which is obviously exciting. Deebo Samuel will be our next name. With Deebo, very difficult to rank him without knowing what we are going to get when it comes to the quarterback play and the availability of Terry McLaurin. What we can say is Deebo Samuel is currently sitting here averaging 6.8 targets per game. At the same time, he's the wide receiver 24 in points per game, so he's been a solid option this season. Obviously, it'd be a lot more excited if Daniels can come in, especially if Terry continues to miss. Ladd McConkey, it just is not it this year. He's the wide receiver 31 in points per game. Coming into the bye, he had scored 4.3 points against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, he's had a ton of target volume, which is why I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt in these rankings. Like, he is averaging 7.6 targets per game. A.J. Brown, very similar to Ladd McConkey, is averaging 7.5 targets per game. I think he's probably a talented player. I think the Eagles probably have a good offense. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. We're going to rank him a lot higher than where he's actually finished so far this year. And I'd still start him with lowered expectations. And then we probably have to put Wan'Dale Robinson this high in the ranks. Now, a couple different things with Wan'Dale. One, he still has to go through the bye week in week 14. And two, honestly, you'd probably wish that Jameis was going to be the starting quarterback for the Giants, just given the passing volume, but you're probably going to get Jackson Dart back this next week. Now, moving over to our next name, we are going to have Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers continues to give you a floor of double-digit fantasy points every week. He scored at least 11 fantasy points every week since his week 7 bye. That's the good news. The bad news is 3 of those games, he only scored 11 fantasy points. He's yet scored a touchdown since week 1. Lamar Jackson does not look like he's fully back. And Rome Odunze, I thought was an interesting buy low candidate. I actually traded for Rome Odunze about a month ago. Obviously, y'all saw me flip him if y'all watched the Flock League videos. But yeah, since the bye week, it's hard to ignore how bad he has been. I mean, he's played a total of 7 games since the bye, and he's only had double-digit fantasy points in 2 of them. Now, DK Metcalf, you're hoping Aaron Rodgers is going to be good to go for this next week against the Buffalo Bills. With Metcalf, he is touchdown or bust. We've seen this time and time again. This past week, he scored a touchdown, so you get 14.5 fantasy points. I have to start him on my team every week. I'm never excited to do so. If you were in a shallower format, I wouldn't start him. But we can kind of say the same thing with Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs has scored 20 fantasy points in 1 game so far this year. He only had 3 targets this past week, and with the Will Campbell injury, maybe a little bit of a tougher spot for Stephon Diggs going into the future. Marvin Harrison, I want to say, is probably the wide receiver 1 here for the Arizona Cardinals. Now, I didn't draft him in many underdog drafts. I took a decent amount of Michael Wilson, so I hope it's Michael Wilson, but knowing how these NFL teams operate and knowing the large sample that we have with Michael Wilson really not doing anything until Marvin Harrison left this lineup, I'd assume that Marvin Harrison's still the guy, sadly. And then Brian Thomas will be our last wide receiver in this tier, only averaging 10.5 fantasy points per game so far this season. Obviously, no bueno, but he's averaging 7.5 targets per contest, so the target volume's there. He's been at practice the past 2 weeks, so I'd expect him to actually play this week. Now, moving over to our next name, we are going to be looking at a Mr. Jameson Williams. Good offense, high weekly ceiling, super low weekly floor. We've known this for years. You've heard me say it every single week for years. There's nothing to discuss. With the Denver wide receivers, Troy Franklin is actually out-targeting Courtland Sutton so far this season. Now, don't get me wrong, Courtland Sutton's been the more efficient wide receiver between the 2 of them, so I'm not going to sit here and say that, oh, we know for a fact that Troy Franklin's the wide receiver 1. I think it's close, but they're both right there. Khalil Shakir will be our next wide receiver. He's sitting here averaging 11.5 fantasy points per game so far this season. I mean, at the same time, if you're looking at the target volume, he's only had 10 targets in 1 single game this year. Ricky Pearsall looked good before the injury. I mean, we're in the 3 games before he went down. He had 7, 6, and 11 targets. He had 2 games with over 100 receiving yards. So we'll see what he does against the Carolina Panthers. We may have to jack him up these rankings if he has a good game. And then Quentin Johnston, my guy, I appreciate you coming through for us in a big time way at the beginning of the year for those best ball teams. But ever since Gadsden's broken out, the Chargers wide receivers have faded to the background. So no longer interesting here. Garrett Wilson, I don't know if he comes back this season. If he does, he's probably more exciting than any of the E-tier wide receivers, the D-tier wide receivers in your rankings. But at the same time, he's not that much better because the offense is garbage and we don't even know if he's coming back. Now, I do not know how to rank the wide receivers 36 through 52. I will rapid fire this, but I'm going to be 100% honest with y'all, and I would love to hear your opinion in the comment section. Like, I don't know how you could start any of these guys. Like, it seems like an extremely difficult spot to be excited about any of them. I will give Michael Wilson his respect. Over the past 2 weeks, he has had 25 receptions, 300 receiving yards, and 33 targets in the past 2 weeks. But he's about to go to literal zero now that you are going to be getting back in, Marvin Harrison. At least I would never start this dude. Alec Pierce, the target volume's been there as of late outside of this one game against the Kansas City Chiefs. The 4 previous games, he had 10, 5, 13, and 7 targets. But at the same time, this is a receiver that is sitting here averaging 10.5 fantasy points per game this year, and that's a career high. Keenan Allen is getting phased out due to Gadsden being involved in this offense. Again, just there's so much target competition for whatever reason. He performed well at the beginning of the year, but he has faded off so sharply. Going over to Terry McLaurin, maybe he comes back. Maybe Jaden Daniels comes back. But even with that in mind, like he hasn't even averaged 10 fantasy points this year. Romeo Doubs has to fall in these rankings. He's averaging 10.8 fantasy points per game so far this season, which is more than almost any wide receiver in this tier. But the ultimate issue that you're going to have is, well, I don't know. You are seeing Jaden Reed come back into this offense, and Romeo Doubs hasn't scored 20 fantasy points since week 4. We can talk about Chris Godwin here. I would like Godwin to do something, but fact of the matter is he hasn't scored double-digit fantasy points all year. He just does not look healthy, does not look like the same guy, and now all of a sudden Baker Mayfield isn't healthy. Jawan Jennings, we'll see what he does in the game tonight. Maybe he is viable. Like, honestly, I think I would rather have Jennings over a lot of these wide receivers now that we really think about it. Because, over the past 5 weeks, he's had at least 5 targets in every single game. But keep in mind, now Kittle and Ricky Pearsall are finally both fully healthy. Jacoby Myers would be a lot higher if it wasn't for the fact that you are going to get Brian Thomas added back in. Xavier Worthy, I would love to rank a lot higher than this, but he has not scored more than 17 fantasy points all year, and he has cracked 11 fantasy points once. Like, unbelievably bad. Going over and looking at Jaden Higgins, he is expanding his role in his offense, which is really exciting. He had a good prospect profile, but still, I don't know how we could go through and make an argument that he is all of a sudden somebody that you can just lock and load. DJ Moore has multiple receiving touchdowns this past week, but at the same time, this is a receiver that's averaging 5 targets a game, and Luther Burden's expanding his role. Christian Watson and Jaden Reed. Christian Watson actually looks like he may be turning into the wide receiver 1 over Romeo Doubs, to be honest with you. And then Jaden Reed, I think, should be back at least at the very minimum at practice, obviously, this week, but maybe at the game. Chimere DK, every Tennessee Titans wide receiver is injured. He has shown that he has some juice, but he plays for the Tennessee Titans. Luther Burden, good prospect, expanding his role back-to-back games with 5 targets, but he's just not ready for this season. And then Trey Tucker, because might as well throw a Raider up here and say, what if Chip Kelly can fix the problem? But I think that's all I got for y'all. I really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. Of course, if you wanted to check out any of those projections on Underdog Fantasy, you can find the link in the description. You can find it in the comment section. Code FLOCK will give you $100 added to your account after you play your first 5. And on top of that, you'll get a gimme Christian McCaffrey pick, higher, lower, half a total yard, plus free questions for the live streams. And we're live streaming every single day until Christmas. But much love. Really appreciate you. And really hope we get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.